Additionally, the introduction of a free market economy would likewise abruptly eliminate global over-indebtedness due to insolvency. Everywhere around the world, entrepreneurs and material asset investors were struck the hardest by today's financial crisis for the following reason. In a deflationary depression, material assets deteriorate due to decreasing revenue prospects and increasing amounts of risk. For nearly every investment, a certain portion is financed through debt. If the debts end up being worth more than the decreasing assets, the investor goes bankrupt. The value of a material asset, like property or a company, is determined just as strongly by the level of interest paid by banks. When valuing material wealth, you compare it to a monetary investment deposited in a bank. A yield of $1,000 at 10% interest corresponds to a real value of $10,000, since $10,000 of value in an investment yields $1,000 at 10% interest. In comparison, with 1% interest, the material value is worth about $100,000, as you would now have to have $100,000 in the bank to receive a yield of $1,000 in interest payments. With the introduction of a free market economy in the financial system, the expected long-term interest level drops precipitously. This leads to a considerable increase of material values because of the reappearance of revenue prospects. For example, the majority of subprime homes in the U.S. would again be worth the money owed on them, and the owners could again pay their monthly mortgages. Bad debtors would again become good. This in turn means the banks and insurance companies would no longer be distressed because their bad debts have become good again. The state does not have to pay out its guarantees. Write-offs and depreciations would have to be reversed. The state receives tax income again instead of having to write tax refunds. Furthermore, as we already know, today's capitalistic socialism supports the gray hand of monopolies with rules and subsidies while building up remedial services to take care of the detrimental effects. Thus, nations tax their citizens to the benefit of the monopolies. This principle must be reversed. We must break the market monopolies. We thus demand the introduction of a monopoly tax for companies that distort competition through their strong market power and artificially force up their own capital returns. Goods from monopolistic companies must be subjected to an additional market monopoly tax, according to a global index of market power and market share. In a free market economy, it is no longer the producing people that pay for the monopolies, but rather the monopolies that pay for the producing people and the common good. Busting up the monopolies now allows us to break up the monopoly of the ownership of employment. In doing this, we eliminate involuntary unemployment and an important factor in politics, being blackmailed by capital. We also recommend the introduction of an unconditional basic income for all citizens of the world. This can be financed with the additional revenues from the monopoly tax and the cost savings from eliminating the socialistic remedial services. This income would only allow a modest but mostly anxiety-free livelihood. For young people, for example, between 18 to 30 years of age, it could even be reduced in order to encourage their own achievement. For older people, single parents, and those incapable of working, an increase should be considered. Each citizen receives this basic income, and now it is left to him or herself to decide how much more income he or she would like to earn. Everyone would be free to organize their life plans according to their ambitions and their needs without objection or control of the national bureaucratic apparatus. Everyone who wants to work can, and in addition to the basic income, earn the current market value for his or her services. Since the labor market is completely free, There are now enormous increases in productivity. The people are focused on their performance and no longer on national rules. Creativity and proprietary development will become the new motors of the free market economy. The invisible hand of self-interest moves more quickly, while at the same time the free market economy will scarcely be weakened by monopolies. More will be produced and more equitably distributed. There will be more prosperity with more extensive freedom from fear. Many, and not just a few, will be able to afford more. The hoarding monopoly of money is broken, and the economic cycle is permanently crisis-free because the exchange of services can no longer be disrupted. The lack of demand is remedied, and thus the economic crisis is permanently over. Having introduced the free market economy to the financial system, we have basically turned it on its head. Moving forward, saving money depends on the credit needs of good debtors. Those who wish to save further invest directly in the real economy in competition for the lowermost returns. Debt accumulation is no longer compulsory. National debts can now be paid down. No one who is not creditworthy receives loans. There is enough competing capital at reasonable conditions for risky investments. We now have a stable financial system with a constant increase in the value of money. Even when interest rates are negative, this will be compensated for by the constant increase in purchasing power. For savers, we have more monetary stability in both value and purchasing power. Global insolvency and inability to pay for homeowners, companies, banks, and nations has been reversed, for the most part. National income is more equitably distributed in favor of the producers, and the liberated invisible hand constantly creates more prosperity for everyone. Uprisings and wars have been avoided. Market and unemployment monopolies have been broken. There is no longer any involuntary unemployment. With goodwill, these solutions can be very quickly implemented. So the world is rescued. Or is it? The current view of the future leaves little room for optimism. There is another big problem that has to be solved. We call it the monopoly of the early birth. This monopoly is made up of everyone who is now living on Earth. The disadvantaged are the coming generations who will be facing a catastrophe of exhausted natural resources. Just as wars have economic crises as their cause, the lack of resources in the future could result in even more bloodshed. This must be prevented.